Okay, so let's unpack this. The heavy bear who goes with me.
Mm-hmm.
That opening line from Delmore Schwartz's poem, it hits you, doesn't it?
It really does.
This sense of, well, a cumbersome, instinctual bear sort of constantly shadowing who we think we are.
Right.
It immediately brings up this ancient question, this divide between our minds and our bodies.
Like they're two separate things.
Yeah, sometimes pulling in completely different directions.
And what's really fascinating is how that powerful poetic image, it just opens up this whole history.
Of cultural assumptions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're diving deep today into excerpts from Susan Bordo's Feminism, Western Culture, and the Body.
Okay.
And she uses Schwartz's bear, really, as a starting point
Mm-hmm.
to explore not just how Western culture has thought about the body,
Mm-hmm.
but how it has actively shaped our understanding of it.
Shaped it, especially regarding men and women.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Especially in relation to gender.
Right. So our mission today, what we're aiming to understand, is how Western culture historically drew this really sharp line.
Between mind or spirit and body.
Exactly. And maybe more importantly, how this seemingly abstract philosophical idea got so deeply tangled up.
Tangled up with our ideas about men and women.
Yeah, leading to some surprising and very real consequences. Things that affect our daily lives, how we see the world.
So let's really get into that heavy bear metaphor then.
Okay.
Schwartz paints this really vivid picture, doesn't he? The body as this constant companion.
Always there, breathing at my side, moving with me.
But, like you said, separate somehow.
Yeah, strangely separate.
Yeah.
Private yet unknown, and it's the source of these very basic needs, desires, sometimes unruly ones.
Right, Schwartz mentions the bear being in love with candy, anger, and sleep.
Mm-hmm. It's this kind of clumsy, lumbering force.
That can get in the way.
Yeah, get in the way of our more thoughtful intentions, or spirit's motive, as he puts it.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Western thought, this negative view of the body, it has such a long history.
Oh, definitely. Thinking back to Plato.
Right. He worried that our senses, what our bodies tell us, constantly trick us.
Making it hard to know what's really real.
Yeah. And Schwartz echoes some of that frustration, seeing the body as an obstacle.
But his take feels a bit different. More modern, maybe?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
It seems more about the body hindering the expression of this inner self, this longing for authenticity.
It's interesting, though, because Bordo points out that even with these negative views, it wasn't always consistent. There's been a lot of back and forth.
Oh, absolutely. Take Plato himself.
Yeah.
In the Phaedo, he sees our passions, our bodily drives, as a distraction from true knowledge.
Right.
But then you get to the Symposium, and he suggests that love of the physical body, that beauty, can actually be the first step towards understanding higher forms.
So a stepping stone, not just a block.
Kind of, yeah. And then you have Christian thought, which generally takes a much more consistently negative view of the body.
Especially the sexual body.
Especially the sexual body, yes. But even within that idea of the body or animal, the interpretations shift again. Well, think about Augustine's view of certain urges as these rebellious forces, almost independent. That's very different from, say, the 17th century scientific view.
The mechanistic view.
Exactly, where the body is seen more like a quantifiable system, a machine. Same basic idea, body separate from spirit, but understood in vastly different ways.
Which leads to this interesting point Bordo makes about objectivity.
Mm-hmm.
Around the 16th century, the fact that the body is just here, rooted in a specific place and time, that started to be seen as a problem.
A problem for knowing things objectively.
Right, because if you have a body, your perspective is inherently limited, located.
So the ideal became this detached view from nowhere to really understand things as they truly are. You had to somehow transcend the body's limitations.
And fast forward to our time, the heaviness of the bear,
Yeah.
it takes on new meanings, doesn't it?
It really does. While Schwartz might have used it more metaphorically about the burden on the self.
Bordo found her students saw it differently.
Yeah, often through a very contemporary lens, connecting it directly to the experience of being overweight.
Especially for women, maybe. And anxieties around hunger.
Exactly. So the interpretation of the metaphor itself shifts with the culture.
Which just shows how these philosophical ideas, even if they seem abstract, they evolve and take on new, weight over time.
And Bordo really highlights this consistent thread, though, through all these different views.
That's
The
right.
body as something separate,
Yeah.
something other than the true self, whether you call that self soul, mind, or spirit.
And almost always seen as holding us back somehow, hindering self-realization.
Which brings up a really crucial question. How does gender fit into all this mind-body separation?
Yeah.
Because as Bordo and other feminist thinkers like Beauvoir and Dinnerstein argue, this division is very, very often tied to gender.
With women historically being associated with the body.
And men with the mind or spirit.
It's that classic projection idea, isn't it? Dinnerstein suggests something like, because women are traditionally the primary caregivers for infants.
Dealing with the basic physical realities, the messiness.
Right. So those bodily limitations, that physicality, gets linked to the feminine.
Meanwhile, men get to represent this more detached, sort of dignified self, separate from all that.
And the consequences for women are huge.
Significant, yes. If the body is seen as the negative side of the split,
Which it often is.
right, then if women are the body in this cultural equation, they inherit all that negativity.
Whatever form that negativity takes in a particular era, distraction, temptation-based desires.
Exactly.
But what's fascinating, going back to Schwartz's poem, is that he kind of flips that script.
He does, doesn't he? The heavy bear is clearly male.
So he's owning the struggles of the body. He's not projecting them onto a woman.
Right. And the feminine presence in the poem, that memory of a comforting past, the longed-for beloved.
It's presented positively, a reminder of something better, not the source of the problem.
Exactly. And Bordo contrasts this sharply with the Christian tradition and its lasting influence.
Where women are so often the temptresses.
Eve, Salome, Delilah. The list goes on, shifting the blame, really, for bodily desires away from men.
And onto women for supposedly arousing those desires.
And we see echoes of this today, don't we? All the time.
Oh, absolutely. Think about those stock villainous characters in soap operas.
Whose main role seems to be sexual manipulation.
Or even, and this is truly disturbing, the way child victims of sexual abuse are sometimes blamed.
That deeply ingrained idea that female presence somehow inherently provokes male desire. It's chilling.
What's particularly striking is Bordo's point about how women's bodies are often read, interpreted as saying something.
Even when they're silent, even without any conscious intent.
Yeah. She mentions historical justifications for excluding women from, say, the priesthood.
The idea that their mere presence might incite impure thoughts in men.
Or that awful example of a man acquitted of rape because of what the victim was wearing.
The miniskirt defense, essentially. The notion that her clothes were somehow an invitation, a form of speech.
It's that interpretation of the female body, even just existing, as inherently suggestive or provocative.
And Bordo uses that personal account from Beneke's work.
About men feeling teased.
Yes, when a woman looks attractive but isn't, romantically available to them, that feeling of entitlement almost.
And she connects this logic to some really dark places.
Like the targeting of sexually independent women in certain types of movies. Slasher films, for instance.
Or the excuses used by men who batter their partners.
Claiming their partners made them do it through some small action, some perceived provocation.
And the point Bordo makes, which is crucial, isn't to demonize all men.
Not at all. It's about highlighting how widespread this cultural ideology is.
And how it affects everyone, both men and women.
Because women internalize this too, right? This sense of blame, of shame.
Definitely. And Bordo suggests that conditions like anorexia nervosa, they can be partly understood in this context.
As a way of trying to escape femaleness.
Yeah, a rejection of female appetite, this extreme attempt to sort of transcend the perceived negativity linked to the female body.
Wow. And it even shapes how we understand other women's experiences.
How so?
Well, Bordo looks at the public reactions to cases like Patricia Bowman, William Kennedy Smith, and Anita Hill Clarence Thomas.
Okay.
And she shows how these cultural myths about women's behavior, like she wasn't careful enough, she was asking for it, how readily they're believed.
Even by other women sometimes.
Yes, sometimes even by other women. As a way, perhaps, to distance themselves, to reinforce their own sense of self-respect and, quote, purity.
It's a way of saying, that wouldn't happen to me because I'm different.
Exactly. It protects against self-doubt.
Now, Bordo also brings in the complexity of race here.
Which is absolutely essential. Because racist ideology often constructs non-European races as more bodily, more animalistic, more sexual.
Layering onto the gendered view.
Precisely. She details the harmful stereotypes of black men as, oversexed threats, and black women as these amoral Jezebel figures.
Stemming from the history of slavery.
Deeply rooted in it, yes. Where black women's bodies were literally treated as property for labor and forced reproduction.
So looking back at the Hill-Thomas hearings through that lens.
It adds another layer.
Yeah.
Bordo points out how these racialized constructions might have influenced how both Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill were perceived and treated.
Okay, so let's shift slightly to this idea of activity versus passivity.
Mm.
Back to Schwartz's heavy bear. The body seems like this passive material thing, just reacting.
While the spirit's motive is the active force, the guide.
And this active-passive divide, Bordo argues, is also intensely gendered.
Oh, absolutely. This idea of the active male and the passive female goes way back.
To Aristotle, even.
Yes, think about his view of reproduction. The male sperm was seen as the active principle, the form giver.
And the female contribution.
The female menstrual material was seen as passive matter just waiting to be shaped.
Even though that's not scientifically accurate.
Not really, no. But the idea was incredibly influential. It shaped biological understanding for centuries.
And Leeuwenhoek seeing the animalcules in sperm.
Right. It seemed to confirm that active male element. Philosophers like Hegel picked it up too.
Hegel compared men to animals and women to plants.
In terms of activity, yes. Animals move, plants are rooted. It reinforced that duality.
It's wild how the language we still use reflects this. Bordo analyzes Guttmacher's text on pregnancy.
Right, from the mid-20th century, describing sperm swimming straight up with almost purposeful success.
Purposeful, while the egg
Just waits, passively awaits fertilization.
Even though we now know fertilization is much more interactive, the egg often travels towards the sperm too.
But the dominant image, the language, remains. Active male, passive female.
That image is powerful. Bordo mentions the opening credits of Look Who's Talking
as a perfect pop culture example. That dramatic race of the sperm like tiny heroes towards the seemingly still waiting egg.
It just reinforces that whole paradigm.
Deeply ingrained.
So what does this all kind of boil down to, Bordo's conclusion on this?
Well, she emphasizes that this mind-body dualism, it isn't just some abstract philosophical idea floating out there.
It's not just theory.
No, it's what she calls a practical metaphysics. It's deeply woven into our institutions, our culture, how we represent things, how we understand ourselves.
So to unravel it isn't just about arguing philosophy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It requires actual concrete changes in how we live, how we think, how things are structured.
And she gives that final example. The Kmart bikes.
Yeah, it's almost funny if it weren't so telling. Gendered names for kids' bikes.
Lion for the boys.
And Little Angel for the girls. Or others like Pursuit versus St. Helen.
Active versus passive right there.
Even on a bicycle. It shows how subtly these gendered ideas about activity, passivity, mind, and body are reproduced everywhere.
Wow. Okay, so to sort of bring this all together, we've really explored how Western culture historically built the separation.
Mind versus body.
And how that split got so tangled up with gender, often associating women with the body side.
We've seen how this seemingly abstract idea pops up all over the place in poetry, philosophy, biology, public reactions, even kids' toys.
It's pervasive, often subtle, but definitely there.
And connecting this back to you, listening, it really is worth taking a moment, isn't it?
To think about how these deep historical and cultural ideas might still be coloring how you see things.
Or what you experience day to day. Have you noticed these gendered assumptions playing out? In your own life or just out in the world?
It definitely makes you think.
It really does. And you have to wonder, in a world that's just so full of images, constantly reinforcing certain ideas, how can we even start to move beyond these really deep-seated dualisms?
That's the big question.
How do we get to a more whole, maybe less rigidly gendered understanding of ourselves, of our bodies?
Maybe, as Bordo suggests, just recognizing where these ideas come from.
Understanding their history, their influence.
Maybe that's the first crucial step. Recognizing the water we're swimming in, so to speak.
Towards actually changing things. A really provocative thought to end on.